All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning into our live stream. Today, we'll be talking about the Corporate Transparency Act. I'll be your host tonight. I am Jalen Vasquez. I'm the director of Freelancers Hub. We thank you for attending tonight. Hope everyone's doing okay after today. We know the elections take a lot out of everybody, but you're here now and you're here to learn about the Corporate Transparency Act. So we've been receiving a lot of your questions by email, a couple through DMs on social media. So we decided to throw this event for all of you. We figured why not just make it a full-on webinar. That way we can live on YouTube. You'll always have the recording for this. You can watch at your own leisure if you ever forget or anything like that. So we also took a couple questions during the registration for this event, and I assure you that they will mostly, if not all, be answered by the end of today's presentation. But if anything does come up, please utilize the chat. Please try to keep your questions very general. We'll not be answering any hyper-specific situational type of questions, just due to the nature of everything and just for time's sake as well. And as you can see, as I mentioned, we are live on YouTube. So if you do have to leave early for anything, dip out, eat, we know what life is like as a freelancer. Things come up. If you'd like to rewatch this webinar again later, you can do so whenever at your own convenience. So let me introduce our guest for this evening, Mr. Jonathan Medows. Jonathan Medows is the managing member of Medows CPA. He received his Bachelor of Science magna cum laude in Economics and Accounting and his MBA in Finance from the Stern School of Business, NYU. He is a certified public accountant in New York, New Jersey, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, and he is a regular, frequent contributor to here at Freelancers Union. He writes on our blogs a lot about taxes, any new tax things that come up. Jonathan is always the first one to write about it, so he loves to help our members. We always thank him for everything he's done with us for Freelancers Union, and we're excited to learn a little bit more about the Corporate Transparency Act, myself included. But hi, Jonathan. How are you?
Great, and I actually had a conversation. The one positive of today's election, from my perspective, is that I think there'll be some chaos, and I really like to write about tax changes. And we all know about how the last administration was one where everyone felt their hair was on fire for 4 years. So, from a writing perspective, it's been kind of quiet, as you know, except for the Corporate Transparency Act. We really haven't had much of new stuff going on, at least for the last 2 or 3 years. So I promise to do my best to keep people apprised of any developments, and we'll get out our popcorn and we'll enjoy the ride. But today, we're going to talk about the Corporate Transparency Act.
Give me one second. I'm going to pull up your presentation.
No problem, sir.
There we go.
Okay, so first of all, I want to start off by saying, first and foremost, that this is not a tax filing. So if you work with an accountant to prepare your taxes, a tax preparer, a certified public accountant, or enrolled agent, this is not, I repeat, is not part of a standard tax filing. So you may want to go back to him or her to make sure to see if they can help you with this if you do not feel comfortable doing so. Do not assume that someone has this on autopilot. They don't. All right. So there's me. I like to write. I find writing helps me to really understand tax law changes, and it's a privilege to be able to speak to you guys. As mentioned, I'm New York born and bred product. Jacket you're wearing is actually made in Brooklyn. Graduated from NYU, undergrad and graduate, and my office is on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, so I'm pretty committed to working in New York City. Next slide, please. And we're going to talk about the Corporate Transparency Act. This is a new law, very, very top level. It's an informational filing requirement. Aside from hiring a professional, there are no fees involved. And what you need to do is, and I'll get to what you need to do. So let me give you a little bit of a background. The Corporate Transparency Act is something that's been developing over the past few years. It went into effect on January 1st of 2024. At the very top level, it's to combat illicit activities such as tax fraud, money laundering, financing for terrorism, and other illegal acts. What it requires is that the federal government get a report from each of us, if we own an entity, reporting the ownership of said entity. Next slide, please. very top level, the BOI, the beneficial ownership report that we need to file, is merely an information report. As I mentioned before, it's separate from your tax filings, and most importantly, if you don't do so, there are significant there are going to be significant penalties for non-filing. As it stands right now, most entities are filed at the state level. So the federal government is a bit in the dark as to who owns entities. So this act is really to combat this and allow the federal government to know who owns which entity. Next slide, please. Okay. Again, this is a federal filing. It's separate and apart from any state filings that you did when you formed an entity, or in the case of New York, every 2 years, you're supposed to update information about the entity. So this act applies to any entity formed at the state or tribal, i.e. Indian tribe level. And it applies to corporations, limited liability companies, limited partnerships, limited liability partnerships, professional corporations, professional PLLCs, business trusts, and other types of legal entities. Bottom line, if something's incorporated at the state or tribal level, you need to file this report. When don't you need to file this report? Top level, let me just address it now. Nonprofits, or you have a DBA. What a DBA is, it's a legal nickname. So in New York City, if I want to work under, I want to call myself Johnny's Tacos, for example, and I'm not incorporating. There's no name after me. That's something that I go down to the county clerk to do. So it's really, really important. If you have an entity, aside from a nonprofit, you need to file this. Next slide, please.
So, and just to clarify,
Yes,
sole
sir.
proprietorships are not required.
Sole proprietorship is not a legal status. That just means you're working for yourself. It's Jonathan Medows under my social security number, maybe an EIN. I don't have to file. Jonathan Medows PLLC, because I'm a CPA firm. Technically, it's CPA PLLC. I have to file for my entity.
Got it. Cool.
So that's the distinction. If you have some sort of corporate indicator after your name, Limited, Inc., Corp., Incorporated, LLC, PLLC, PLLC. I'm sorry to do this at nauseum. I'm trying to drive on the point. You need to file this. Who's a beneficial owner? Sorry for the typo, guys. So we put this together relatively quickly. A beneficial owner is someone who exercises substantial control. It includes any owner who has 25% of the entity or anyone who exercises management control. Bottom line, if you can hire, fire, write checks, if you act like a boss, you should be filing this. So for example, I have an entity with my wife. She owns more than 75%, but I'm a partner. But I do a lot of the work. I manage the funds. I buy the insurance. I'm a beneficial owner. I also have to file this. A beneficial owner doesn't necessarily have to have an ownership interest in this. Just someone who exercises substantial control. It's really, really important. The reason why they added this is because a lot of people will create entities and technically not have their names on it, but in reality, it's their company. So the government wants to know who are the owners, anyone who owns 25%, and anyone who functions substantially as the owner of the entity. Next slide. Okay. So I'm sorry to be repetitive, but I'd rather make sure that everyone understands this. So we've said that this is a new reporting requirement. It's at the federal level, separate and apart than anything that's done at the state level. It applies to any corporate entity formed at the tribal or state level. It does not, I repeat, does not apply to nonprofits. If your entity was formed prior to 2024, you have until December 31st, 2024 to file this report. If you have a new entity that was formed in 2024, like I have prospective clients that come to me and say, oh, I formed my entity online. You have 90 days after you form that entity to file this beneficial ownership report. If you didn't, if you fall into this category and didn't do so, please fix it tonight. In 2025, unless the law changes, a new entity will have 30 days to file this. Next slide, please. So I had a client that came into my office earlier this morning, and he said to me, "What's the deal with the CTA, Jonathan? Is it something that I need to do every year?" So as of right now, it's a one-time filing. However, if the beneficial owners change, or if any information changes, such as the address of the company, or frankly, the information of the owners change, and as part of this, you have to submit a ID to the government. For example, you submit your driver's license and that driver's license expires. You have 30 days to update this information with the federal government. So right now it's a one-time filing until you either have a change in ownership or change in beneficial owners, i.e. managers, or if you move, or if any IDs are updated. Next slide, please. Now, what has to be filed? Legal name, date of birth, address, and a unique identifying number from a current passport, driver's license, and an image of the document. So if your driver's license expires, your passport expires, you have to update this. Next slide. What's also required? Next slide, please. Looks like this is a dupe. Okay. Now, there's a carrot and a stick. What happens if you don't do it? Massive fines, 591 days per day if the form is not filed. Hypothetically, there can be criminal implications of not doing so. I would strongly encourage everyone to address this as soon as possible. Next slide. Okay. The exemption, there's some exemptions here. Bottom line, if you're a nonprofit, and if you're not engaged, if your business was created before 2020 and it's not active and is less than $1,000 in assets, you theoretically do not have to file. However, I just strongly urge you to still file. Here's why. In about 2 to 5 years, the government, my intuition tells me, unless this is repealed or changed, federal government is going to get database access to each of the states that have where you form entities, and they're going to cross-reference every active entity that's in the state database with the reports that were filed. And if they have an entity where they feel a report isn't filed, you're going to get a letter with a fine. So if you have an active entity, I just encourage you to file it. Next slide. And there's some exceptions if it's dormant, very top level for many years, and or if an entity is regulated by the federal government, which really shouldn't apply to freelancers, such as you're a publicly traded company, you're registered with the SEC or some other federal government agency, then you're exempt. But for most of us, we're not exempt. Next slide. And as I mentioned a couple of times already, that if you had a dormant entity, you may not necessarily need to do so, but I'm encouraging all my clients to file. Next slide. Okay. Now, some states, independent of the U.S. Treasury, are enacting their own separate, unique DOI reporting requirements. I know New York State is doing this specifically for LLCs, and it should go into effect on January 1st, 2026. The reporting requirements have not come online yet. I know there's been mullings also in California. I think some other states will do so, so definitely keep an eye out if I feel that, if I become aware of something, I definitely will write an article for the Freelancers Union on this. Alrighty. And next slide. And bottom line, when in doubt, I strongly suggest that you file this. Please do so now. My concern also is that as you approach end of the year, I have an anxiety that the federal government's computers may crash because a lot of people are a bit tardy on this. Compliance has not been great so far. So I definitely encourage everyone to file this. With that, I'm going to open this up to questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I have a couple questions came in the chat, and then I know we have the ones that we had queued up from before. Give me 1 second. And then I'm going to also throw this up as well. You can also, for filing, you would go to boifiling.fincen.gov. They also have more information of just like all the paperwork as well. I know Jonathan mentioned some of the paperwork required through the presentation, but if you need to go back, definitely check out their website. I'll put a link.
It's not onerous. Bottom line, have an ID. They have to scan it front and back. Driver's license, passport. Those are your 2 default documents.
Yeah. If you're an organized business, you should be easily get all the paperwork for it. But
if you're not organized, start now. So this way it gives you a little bit more time to get organized.
Yeah, but either way, I'll put this link down in the description later today, so people can see it as well if they have more questions or if they just need other resources about it. But yeah, so first question, I know we spoke a little bit. Someone had just a question about privacy concerns. So who will have access to this information, and do you know if there's any way to be protected? That might be a little bit out of your league, but just
right now it's you have to upload an ID. It's information that's held by the federal government. They claim that they're going to share it with other federal and state agencies. They may change that. But that for now, that's what they say. I personally think that eventually it'll be open to plaintiff bars in case of lawsuits. That's my concern. But for right now, it's federal and state agencies.
Got it.
Top level, aside from the financial frauds and all this stuff, I think a big issue for the federal government is for corporate taxes or payroll taxes, or in the case of states, payroll and or sales tax, where there's not compliance. So even though it's an entity, some taxes, this is called the trust fund penalty, where the owners and the beneficial owners are responsible for those taxes. So for example, Social Security taxes. As an employee, I collect this. I have to remit it to the government. I'm taking that in trust for my staff. It's not my money. It's their money. It's for the federal government's money. Let's suppose, God forbid, there's a snafu and they don't get the money. I'm personally liable to pay that. So a lot of corporations are taking monies that are collected on behalf of the state sales tax or Social Security tax on behalf of their employees. And sometimes you have nefarious individuals that will abscond with these funds, and they try to use an entity to hide behind it. The federal government wants to know who owns these things so they can rightfully go after people.
Got it. It's good to know. So we have a couple questions that came in specifically about a single member LLC. One person asks, what about if you're a single member LLC, but you elect to file your taxes as a sole proprietor?
No, by default, the single member LLC is files on Schedule C, which is a sole proprietor. You absolutely have to file this.
Okay, so regardless of tax formation,
regardless if you're filing a separate tax return or if it's incorporated as part of your personal tax return. Like an LLC can be an S corporation, could be a corporation, it could be a partnership, or it can be a sole proprietorship. Regardless of incarnation of this, you need to file this. It's very important that people realize that.
Got it. And the next question that someone asked, I'm a single member LLC that's a discard entity but have an EIN. Do we put our Social Security or EIN on the form? I believe it's both because it's information about you and then information about the entity.
Yeah, go ahead, try. Have both available. Whatever they ask, just comply.
Cool. Next question that just came in. Is it true that if your corporation makes over a certain amount of money, you don't need to fill this form out?
That's incorrect. Meaning,
right, so
if you're a dormant entity, no, it isn't. Let me say, Stacy, it isn't like, okay, I only make $500, I only gross $500, I'm exempt. No, you need to file it.
Got it. And then there's no, I guess, maximum threshold.
No, absolutely not. I think it was more of a minimum amount, I suspect.
Okay.
But no, definitely not maximum. There's no maximum amount.
Cool. All right. Any other questions that maybe on anyone's minds? I know we kind of sped through this. I mean,
it's simple. I try to keep it simple. Relative bottom line, you have some sort of entity. you need to file this.
It's honestly, that's why we ask you to do this for us, because we know you like to keep it
No,
simple, easy for people to follow.
I'm a New Yorker. I'm a straightforward guy. It's also I'm on hour 11 and a half of the day, so forgive me. You had a question about a nonprofit before we got on?
Yes, I can answer that. Give me 1 second. I was going to answer a question in the chat that someone asked about an LLC filing as an S corp. The answer is yes. Since you're an entity, yes, you have
Absolutely.
to. So the other question, about the nonprofit. I'm a New York LLC, own 100% under or by a 501c3 corporation. Is the LLC required to file?
Offhand, yes, definitely file. Again, my concern is in 2 to 5 years, they're going to take supercomputers and cross-reference the state entities. And if they don't have a report, you're going to get a nasty gram. Very unpleasant to be in.
Yeah. Last thing you want is letters saying like, "Oh, you owe this much money for failure to comply to federal laws."
You'll be calling and screaming. And don't assume if you work with someone, whether an attorney or CPA or enrolled agent or tax preparer, that he or she is handling this. The default's not to handle it. The separately required report to file.
Got it. Another question came in. I don't know if you have the answer for this, but Lauren asked, "How do we verify our filing status?"
You should get a receipt from them and an acceptance letter afterwards. I actually had a client that attempted to file something. She forgot that she asked my office to prepare it for her, and she got a reject. So you should go on and get they give you filing receipts. If you're not sure if you did or not, try it again.
Got it. And then I assume if things are incomplete, if you're missing, someone will just reach out and just say, "Hey, we just need this info to complete."
Or it won't go through.
Okay. That makes sense too. Cool. Any other questions before we do wrap up? I can also put Jonathan's info back on the screen. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us.
Now, I don't know if the change and if the new president-elect will quash this or not. I can't assume so. He may. I don't know. He's done crazier stuff. You have to go under the assumption that everything that was passed up to now will stay in place.
Yeah.
I know there's been very poor compliance rates of this, so I'm not sure if I've heard murmurs that they may extend the deadlines on this, but I would go under the assumption that people are not, that the powers that be will not. And it's just definitely important to get this in.
Got it. Cool. Well, I think that might be it. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for taking time of your day. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And yeah, since this is on YouTube, this will be on here forever until the laws change, and maybe we have to remove it just because it's.
I'm back. If something changes, I'm happy to do that again. Have a good night, everyone.
No problem. Thank you so much, Jonathan. All right, everyone. Thank you all for tuning in to this quick webinar. I know it was a lot quicker than we anticipated. Definitely, if you have other further questions for us, you can reach out to us at, there we go, advocacy at freelancersunion.org. We're happy to answer any questions, any resources that you are looking for. And we'll probably send out a follow-up to people tuning in now, and we'll probably include this in our newsletter as well, just for future members, anything like that. And just remember, you can become a Freelance Union member for free at freelancersunion.org if you haven't done so already. And be sure to file online at the link here for the Corporate Transparency Act. I will put the link down below in the description later. And thank you all for tuning in. I hope you have a wonderful night. Take care, everyone.